And you're welcome to the RTÉ Rugby podcast ahead of the Heineken Cup Final this weekend. Delighted to be joined, as always, by Donal Lenihan, Jackman and Wes Liddy. Lads, you're all very welcome. I guess we'll start with the weekend just gone, Donal, if you don't mind. And I don't know whether Munster didn't want to play in the final or they just heard that the South African sides were coming with them and decided, we don't really need this season. But they certainly ruined a very good chance to book their place in the Rainbow Cup Final by the defeat to Connacht on Friday night.
Yeah, they did. I mean, typical Munster. Every time they were in touch of doing something, I think they're making serious progress. As you know, they were very impressive against Ulster the previous week. They come up short. I think, look, we got to give fair credit to Connacht. Firstly, a great game, and we have been a bit critical. We've been sceptical about the Rainbow Cup, but I have think over the past couple of weeks we've given due credit to the competitiveness of the local derbies. And again, I thought we were treated with two fantastic games, two really competitive games. But Munster, I mean, that announcement coming on the Friday morning, the fact that you are going to have this a meeting of minds, a first ever, a club final between Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, Munster in the driving seat, go out and beat Connacht. You've two games to go, Cardiff at home, Zebra away, and surely you can, you cement your place in that final. I thought, we're going to talk about refereeing decisions and all that, but I think all those are cop-outs. They're excuses. The bottom line is that game was well within their compass to win it, and they didn't do it.
And I think, Bernard,
but it matters. We've been down this road before.
Yeah, absolutely. And to give Connacht their full credit, Bernard, I often think if Connacht were given I guess more resources, or if they had more of the caliber of players perhaps that we see at some of the other provinces, that they could be the leaders in terms of shining the light on how to play this game, because Andy Friend has done a really good job, a bit like how Pat Ladden did before him, and they were full value for the win, I thought, overall.
No, they took their opportunities and then they hung in and they took Munster out of their comfort zone. So the previous two games that we were very impressed with Munster, Leinster and Ulster, they were completely dominant at the breakdown, and Connacht got amongst them, and they got there first at times, and they, when they weren't there first, they disrupted them, and they took Munster completely out of their stride. And I think they did deserve the win, because it took a huge effort, and particularly the resilience they showed, obviously bouncing back from a very tough game, defeat to Leinster. Realistically, they had nothing on the line. They were looking at finishing their season with 3 or 4 games that couldn't really get them anywhere, and yet they managed to bring a performance that shook Munster. And they rode their luck. They didn't dominate possession or territory in the game, but they took their chances and they got a famous win. And I just think they've shown now, winning in Ravenhill, winning in the RDS, and winning in Thomond Park in the same year, that they have a team to go to war with the three provinces. The problem they have is the strength and depth, Hugh, and that's down to resource, and that's why we see them not being able to do it week in, week out, particularly when they have a few injuries. But that's understandable given the fact that they have a significantly smaller budget than the other provinces. But I think Andy Friend, part of the great job he's doing is he's keeping that squad together and not letting those really frustrating defeats that they had earlier in the year. I think back to Munster at home, when they 13v15, like, they're hard to take, but he seems to manage the squad's mind and mental state to be able to bounce back from those, which is it's a challenge in itself. So yeah, look at they now can look back in the season with a lot of positives, even though they don't have any silverware or knockout finals to look back on. But I think they are building, and obviously with a few new coaches coming in over the summer, and I'm sure there'll be a couple of recruits as well. Obviously they need to replace Quinn Rue. I think they're looking. What I like about them is they've depth in the key positions. Depth at 9 now with Marmy and Blade. Depth at hooker with Heffernan and what's his name?
Della Hunt.
Yeah, Della Hunt. Sorry. Yeah, and then fullback, Tierna Halloran and John Porch, etc. So they never had that before. So yeah, they're definitely on the right track.
What I like about them, Wes, is that, because of the way that they play, the sum of their parts sometimes is greater than, I guess, the paper opposition. And by that, I mean, like, Andy Friend has them playing a system of rugby that's actually, first of all, really enjoyable to watch. But also it's capable of beating some of the best teams on their day, such as the manner in which they're comfortable passing the ball and are prepared to actually run the ball from pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with you generally, but I think ironically, and kind of in keeping with the theme of inconsistency that's maybe dogged their season a little bit, I don't think they actually had to be at their most constructive to win the other night. There was phenomenal effort, there was phenomenal resilience. Some of the tackle stats were incredible, as Bert said, but I don't think they actually had to play their best attacking rugby to win that game. They were gifted 2 tries with horrendous errors, really. I do think there's probably, look, it's brilliant to beat the other 3 provinces away from home, first and foremost. The funding thing is probably an interesting one with Connacht and this kind of, quote unquote notion of them as a development province, and how relevant that really is anymore, and how if that's possibly an outdated idea and something that needs to be looked at. As far as the game itself, I thought it was almost so incongruous, some of the stuff that happened, that it doesn't even bear analysis in a lot of ways, because there was things that happened multiple times that it was hard to even judge the given player on, because we know that typically they're better than that. I think back to Ben Healy having a 3 or a 4 on 1 overlap at one point and loads of time just deciding not to pass. Think back to Joey Carberry throwing an offload to a Connacht player at one point when they're in the 22, kicking the ball straight down the pitch on another. So there was a kind of a maelstrom of circumstances of a very poor Munster performance, a very motivated Connacht performance, some strange refereeing in both teams' direction, and that produced a kind of a very entertaining but a very, I suppose, unorthodox kind of game, I thought. But I suppose both teams as well since have been the news of Stephen Fitzgerald having to retire and James Cronin being released, obviously, are both big talking points within each province respectively since then as well.
Yeah, and we'll come back to those 2 as well in a second. But it's I guess it's been a theme of Munster this season, Donal, and for probably a few seasons beforehand. You mentioned it before in this podcast, and you've written about it as well, that when it comes to the crunch for Munster, forget about the teams that kind of broke the mold and won the Heineken Cup back in 2006, 2008. When it came to big games, they were able to lift their performance level. When Munster have had big games this season, they've just utterly failed to play up to expectation.
Yeah, I think that's the most frustrating part for me, because almost in every game you see glimpses of improvements in terms of their alignment in attack, the variety in terms of their attack. As always, their set piece is strong, their line-out maul is strong. Then they kind of, there was a number of games when they got the balance wrong between their kicking game and in terms of trying to retain that possession or put the opposition back 3 under pressure. So it's hugely frustrating. And, having, for me, probably the most frustrating performance was the Pro 14 final against Leinster, when they just didn't turn up. I mean, I don't buy into the subsequent hype when they went up and beat Leinster a couple of weeks later in the opening round of the Rainbow Cup. That was irrelevant for me, really, because it all comes down to what you do when the pressure is greatest and you have to perform. And again, it's just happened on too many occasions. So that for me is really worrying. And that's why now, having been a bit sort of skeptical or cynical about the Rainbow Cup, I actually think Munster need to recover from what happened last weekend and get to that final. It would mean something to this group. There's no doubt about that. Like, there is psychological baggage there, whether they like to admit it or not. But I think, to get to a final now, whether they'll be good enough to beat, it looks like the Bulls or the Sharks will probably be the representatives from South Africa. But I'd love to see it. I'd love to see, where are they in relation to that particular opposition. But it's just, look, it comes down to performances on days that matter. And that is why I've been hugely impressed by Andy Friend over the past number of years for a variety of reasons, not least, I think, what Birch alluded to, in that they do have their disappointing days as well, when things go against them, or they just don't stand up, or physically they're blown away. And you can understand that, because when they're short 4 or 5 of their frontline players, it's more difficult for them. But I think a true measure of a coaching group is how you blend a group together, number one, how you build that resilience, and the manner in which they bounce back from, let's be honest, they were filleted by Leinster down, having gone 14-0 up, only, you know, in the sports ground, you know, a great start to the game, and they were just blown away. Yes, they were able to rock up the following day, and he has instilled that belief. And I mentioned 3 players within that Connacht setup this year. Every time I see them, they impress me. Gavin Thornbury, like, we know his history, didn't get an opportunity in Leinster for understandable reasons, went off to New Zealand, played a season or 2 down there. He's got better and better every time he's played, to the extent, you know, that, you know, Quinru and Ultan Delan are obviously the 2 top second rows in Connacht. But when Thornbury comes in, they lose nothing. In fact, they gain in other areas. Young Niall Murray, we've seen him involved with the Irish 20s, you know, and he was kind of behind the likes of Charlie Ryan and these guys who were in the Leinster setup. Yet, outstanding last week. And Tom Daley is another, you know, came out of Leinster, played a lot of AIL with Lansdowne, ended up captaining the team. Like, you don't become captain, that's a reflection of where you are within the group, your ability to influence other people. And this was a guy, and we've harped on it numerous times about the role of club rugby. He's another guy, I think, that you can look to, that Connacht and Andy Friend have resurrected his career. He's had a fantastic season. So that's why I admire Friend and Connacht. And, you know, at times maybe we're guilty, we don't give them the credit that they deserve here.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a big talking point, Birch, was in both games, the Leinster-Ulster game, which will come to in a second as well, was the performances of the referees. In particular, Munster Peter Manny was hugely aggrieved at what he felt were a couple of decisions that should have gone their way and didn't, and vice versa as well. Obviously, Joy Neville had a role to play in her interjection as TMO. Peter Manny was so annoyed after the game that he wouldn't even speak to the post-match interviews. He put CJ Stander up, who pretty much had nothing to lose, and said exactly how he felt. And referee was a 16th man. Was it as bad as that in your view, the performance?
Okay, I actually don't think he was biased against Munster. I just think he had a very poor performance and he lost control. And, you know, it's become normal for us to have a little bit of an all-in early in these interprovincials, whatever, but it needs to be dealt with there and then. And when you let it simmer, like it was allowed to happen then, both teams kind of lost trust in the referee's ability to lay down any sort of discipline. And like we saw subs getting involved, and not just like involved quite significantly in one of the brawls and a little bit in the second one. And, you know, the answer the referee gave was, you know, I can't punish the subs. And I actually don't know the rule book on that because I've never seen subs being involved in it. But I would say, look, if he a stance on it and it proved to be outside the rules, I don't think anyone would really have any massive issue with that. Like, we don't want to see that. We don't want to see subs getting involved in all-ins. It just becomes so hard to control. So I just think bit by bit over the course of the game, they lost the sense of control, the sense of discipline. And at the end, definitely Munster were more frustrated because they were chasing it. They were chasing the score, and they felt at the end they had a legitimate captain's challenge that didn't go their way, etc., etc. But I could see it. I was at the ground. I could see the frustration, the body language. Maybe I don't know if it was picked up on camera, off camera, amongst the Munster players in particular. But that's Connacht had moments where they were frustrated as well. But I think, and I highlighted this, you know, a couple of months ago. We're at a level now where in the Pro 14, now very few players or coaches have any confidence in the match officials to actually perform at a high level. And we saw Mike Adamson in the last couple of minutes in the Leinster Ulster game, you know, turns back to a player and tells him to shut up, you know, as he's running to the next ruck. And that, you know, Ian Madigan was picked up on the ref mic, you know, obviously speaking his mind and speaking out of turn about the decision. You know, everyone saw the way Ian Henderson was getting, you know, flabbergasted by the decision about the Robbie Henshaw thing. So we're seeing now players lose control, right? And look, you can blame the players or whatever, and they need to be better. 100% need to be better. But also, I think the officials need to be better. And, you know I when I was coaching the Dragons, I had massive issues with referees, and Greg Garner, who's the head of referees, was brilliant. Every Monday morning, he replied to my email and the footage, and he accepted that there was a lot of errors. Okay, and it wouldn't just been our opposition would have had the same thing. It wasn't they were biased against the Dragons. It was just poor officiating, and unfortunately, like the Pro 14 coaches, they call the referees the apologists. Okay, like they don't call them the referees, they call them the apologists, because on a Monday morning you get apologies, right? But next Friday, next Saturday, the same thing again. So where's the improvement? We see the Pro 14 referees, they're not really getting up to the top level of Six Nations or World Cups. So I think it's just another area of the game that we've slipped back on. And in fairness to the referees, the game is moving on faster than they're able to keep up. All right, so there is a challenge there, and it is a very difficult thing. It's a very difficult sport to referee at the moment. But again, I'm not really worried about the laws end of it. I can understand someone misses an offside line or a technical infringement, the breakdown. That happens. For me, it's the relationship side of it. We've lost complete ability to have a relationship with the referee in a positive way, where we talk to each other like adults. And the Mike Adamson one, I've never heard a referee tell a player to shut up. Yeah, like in play, I've heard a referee when they're engaging with them to say, "Listen, be quiet," But like the game, he's running to a ruck and he turns back and shouts at someone like, I don't know who it is, it's a Leinster player, "You shut up." You know what I mean? That shows you the referees are getting, they're out of control as well, or they're out of the zone as such, and it's very hard to. I mean, if you look at a sniper training, it's all about staying calm. It's not about being out of control, making good decisions. It's about being able to stay calm. And I just think referees at the moment, they've got their back up from the start of games. The players have got their back up from the start of games, and we're seeing a lot of conflict, which we need to get it sorted out, because it's not helping the spectacle. It's not helping the referees. It's not helping the players. It's helping nobody.
And I think the captain's challenge, Wes, if anything, has highlighted the amount of mistakes the referees are making, because almost every captain's challenge has proven to be correct and true in what the captains have been saying. If you wanted a snapshot, I think, about maybe the officialing and I guess where they're at confidence-wise, that Robbie Henshaw tackle, which we'll get into the rights and wrongs of that in a second, but I was at the RDS. Mike Adamson, the game lasted 2 hours, by the way, almost 2 hours for a rugby match to take place. Mike Adamson and Ollie Hodges had a discussion for 5 minutes on whether or not the Robbie Henshaw tackle warranted a yellow card, red card, or any kind of disciplinary action whatsoever. Ollie Hodgins on 3 occasions said to Mike Adamson, there is no clear contact with the head. Mike Adamson asked for other angles, saw every angle 17 times over, still couldn't make up his mind. Again, asked the same question, which was told the same answer 3 or 4 times. It took 5 minutes, no action was taken. And I thought, if you want a snapshot of where the referees are at, that's a pretty good indicator as far as I'm concerned about where we're at here.
He mustn't have done enough of that sniper training, I think, is probably the answer there, Hugh, Yeah, it was a joke, the Henshaw one. He either hit him or he didn't. And it wasn't exclusive to that one. I think Birch said about the players having lost confidence in the referees. I was talking to a player during the week that was involved last weekend, and they've also lost confidence in the touch judges. And I was told of an example where James Cronin, there was a Connacht player lying over the ball and he's slapping a player on the back 2 yards from a touch judge, pointing out that he's killing the ball, he's ignored, and things like this happen multiple times throughout the game. You look at the communication between the referee and the TMO, the video ref, and like if you look at that Munster Connacht game, one of the ones penalised was when Joy Neville interjected herself, which I'm not even sure on the protocols around the interjection unless asked for, which hasn't been made clear at all. But then on some of the cases where the referee asked for her counsel, so to speak, he just completely ignored the advice on that last play, which I think the decision was right, by the way, but she said it's clear knock on off 1 red, or it's off the boot of 1 red, and he just ignored it, said knock on. I don't know if you remember the Dennis Buckley turnover on their own line as well. 2 phases before that, you can hear on the ref mic, green 3 and 5 offside. Yeah. Ignored. 2 phases later, penalty the other way. So it's that inconsistency is the easy way to say it, but it's not adhering to the protocol of how these things are meant to be implemented that I think causes the frustration in a lot of cases. But the communication's another one that Birch outlined. Like, I was never a fan of the kind of yes sir, no sir stuff in rugby that was held up as this great model of how to communicate with referees. I think it's completely outdated in this day and age.
You didn't grow up with that principle in Limerick, no? You didn't?
No, I
didn't.
didn't.
3 bags, no?
I think, like, Nigel Owens used to be doing it for years, and we all got a great laugh out of it. It's not soccer. And I remember him telling Billy Holland how to jump in a line out one time. It's ridiculous that you talk to grown men, professionals like this. So it's multi-layered, and the quality of referee you probably can't divorce from what's happening at grassroots level, because that's where referees come from. And there's just lots and lots to unpack with it. But it's kind of reached a tipping point, certainly within the Pro 14 competition as it stands.
I imagine, Donal, it must be hugely frustrating for coaches to get apology letters from referees the Monday after they know that they've made massive mistakes. It's absolutely no good to either side sending apologies.
Well, it's too late after the event, but if you learn to live with that, when the same problem arises the following week to what they identified was a mistake the previous week, then you can see why they're so frustrated. But look, can I say, I do remember being told shut up by a referee once myself, and he was probably right. He disallowed a perfect try for me, and I kept running after him. Oh, in the name of Jesus, did you miss that? So he did tell me to shut up, but he was probably right. I would say, in terms of what's happening at the moment, is the control of the referee has been diluted by the system. We're adding so many layers into refereeing, and we spoke about this in the last few weeks. You have the TMOs, the captain's challenge even. I've seen a number of games over the past number of weeks where the referees are telling, well, no, you can't challenge that because there wasn't a penalty given there. Then you have this scenario in the last 10 minutes when you can challenge something different to what you've been doing in the previous 70 minutes. So even the people, the professionals, the captains, they're not 100% sure what they're entitled to come in and what they're not entitled to. You then have the advent of the TMO. The TMO was to originally foul play and events in the act of scoring a try. Now they're being used for everything. Forward passes, potential knock-ons. I watched a game, Bristol and Gloucester the other night, and there was 7 tries. Gloucester had 7 tries disallowed. I think 6 in the first half. Now, to be fair, I think the vast majority of them were corrected low when you went back. But again, that was another game that lasted over 2 hours. It's just become a sideshow. This whole thing, all this intervention, it's diluting the power of the referee. And I think because a lot of the referees generally in Pro 14, they are the younger guys, if you like, and who are on the way up. So they're subject to their peers analysing the thing they do on the field. And I think there's an element of fear with the referees, where they're thinking about their assessor and what he's going to say to them after the game. So therefore, he's afraid to take decisions. Birch mentioned the intervention of the subs on 2 occasions. I mean, it was ridiculous. If you did have a Nigel Owens or a Wayne Barnes, they'd have sorted that out straight away. Yellow card, a fella from either side on the field, as a consequence almost of what the subs were doing, because it was an all-in. You could have made an example of 2 fellas and say, not putting up with this anymore, and that's the end of it. So therefore, you reap what you sow. But I think it's the way the evolution of refereeing and control of the game, that the way it has gone in the past number of years has brought us to this point where there's almost nothing that happens on the field that isn't sent upstairs for adjudication. That's why we end up having games that last 2 hours. We're bored. You've heard me numerous times in the commentary box. Why are we keeping going back looking at a clip? It's definitive. It's a try. It's not a try. It's a high tackle. It is contact to the head. What are they doing? Would you ever hurry on and get to the point?
Mike Adamson looked, Birch, absolutely terrified to make a decision in the Robbie Henshaw tackle. It was almost like he wanted Ollie Hodges to say there has been contact at the head, so then he could follow his protocols and he knew exactly what to do. But he was left in limbo because he's looking at a tackle that obviously was fairly full on. Clearly, Ian Henderson wasn't happy about, but yet there was no contact at the head. So he was kind of like, well, what do I do here? What do I hear? And this has led to a bit of a debate about the merits of the tackle itself. Now, I got into a bit of an argument about this last night because I think there's no contact to the head. It was a hard hit. Therefore, play on, there's nothing to see here. But the argument against that, and the argument that I've read over the last couple of days from plenty of people, is that it was a reckless tackle, and that in and of itself should have been punished because it was reckless. Where do you stand on this?
I don't see how the referee can do anything else, because he didn't break any laws, to be honest. I mean, it was very aggressive, but he didn't break any laws, so it's in the law, and it's so I don't have an issue with it, to be honest. I know people are outraged by it and saying it was a bad example, but unless I don't, in this situation, I don't blame Mike Adamson. I'm sure he was afraid of getting it wrong, but that's probably one of the examples where we put so much pressure back on him and the team around him to follow a process. But in this situation, they couldn't get into that process because he hadn't actually broken any law. So I don't have any issue with that. And I'm all for player safety, and I'm all about head injuries. But at the moment, that's not. Robbie Henshaw didn't step outside the law, and I think we have to stick to the laws, honestly. So I lots of people are against me on that, but for me, it's a very aggressive tackle. It's close to it. You know, it could have been it could have been dangerous, but it was within the laws, and that's the issue. So for me, I don't think that Adamson could have done anything on that case.
I'm glad that you agree with me, because everybody else seems to be going against me. Whereas, Robbie Henshaw assumed a risk there, right? I mean, he gets that an inch or two wrong, and he is either sent off, potentially facing a 3 or 4 week ban, could put his Lions, in jeopardy, or even an injury to himself as well. He assumed the risk, and he didn't break any laws. I understand that people think it looks like a rough tackle. It was, but rugby is a contact sport. Like, it's not tag rugby we're looking at here.
Yeah, I think the problem, though, sorry, Hugh, is, the optics. People have been watching, and, there's been so much talk about your entry point into the tackle, trying to lower the height of the tackle. It just so happened that both players were upright, and Birch is right. Technically, in relation to the law, he didn't do anything that warranted a yellow card or a red card. But I think in terms of the optics of, what rugby is trying to do and lower the point of the tackle, that one just, it looked wrong. It felt wrong, but within the eyes of the law, it was okay. So I can understand why Henderson was frustrated on the field. I can understand why it's generated so much debate, but you've got to recognize that you've got to operate off the evidence that's in front of you, and he didn't break the law. So that's it.
Whereas I thought it looked great, to be honest. I thought it was a smashing tackle.
I was just about to say it till Donal jumped in. It was because of the upright position of them going in, that the heads were near together, that it took that it looked like something it wasn't. But it's kind of a bizarre conversation to be having. Either he broke the rule or he didn't, and he didn't. So
why do we have 4 articles that I have read since Friday night, people commenting that something should have happened here? What am I missing? Because it looked reckless, therefore he should have been given a sanction that actually is not in the rule book. I don't understand.
There is an argument that you have to over legislate when it comes to contact with the head, but then that needs to be stated that actually, no, the upper chest is now the new tackle line rather than the shoulder, or whatever it may be. But you can't I don't know, as far as I can see, there's no legal standing for any debate.
Yeah,
he hit him fair and square.
And the Leinster bench got up. I was at the RDS. The bench got up and they roared with their appreciation for what they thought was a man and ball tackle that would have saved a try. There was 2 players outside Robert Balakoon that would have got the ball if he chipped it on. Henshaw prevented the try. He hit him hard, and I thought it was a very good tackle. I mean, I think we're beginning to lose the run of ourselves here, Bernard, where the game is just being not the head contact. I'm all for protecting the heads, but that wasn't head contact. It was chest on chest, shoulder even, and there's nothing wrong with that in my book.
Yeah, Robbie took on the risk. If he gets that, 1%, the other side, he's a red card and a long ban, and that's the only thing we can have. With players either break their law or they stay within the law, and when they go to that extreme, they take on the risk. And on that occasion, Robbie didn't break any law, so he's fine. And I think there still has to be an element of ability to be physical in the game, and Robbie made a decision and he executed it. It looked bad. It was a big collision, but he wasn't high, and That's it. It's like a fella, stretching for the line. This decision he makes, if he makes it, it's a try. If he's just short, he's just short. It's those kind of decisions happen all the way through the game. Here we're looking at a focus from a tackle point of view, and it's been watched and looked at for 5 minutes, and everyone has an opinion on it. And it's great people are worried about player safety. That's really important. But I would put it back on World Rugby. If the tackle line has to drop, well, then it needs to go into the rules. I mean, you can't blame a player for executing what's legally allowed.
Yeah.
Because they're always going to push. They're always going to push that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, just a couple of things before we talk about Champions Cup final briefly. James Cronin, you alluded to this earlier on, Wes. James Cronin leaving Munster. Is there a story here behind this? What's the reading of it that he's been allowed to leave?
I don't know if there's a story behind it. I presume it's just a budgetary thing. Well, that's certainly what's been outlined.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to understand. I suppose Dave Kilcoyne is undisputedly first choice there, and obviously Josh Wycherley is the next coming player. And like, in fairness, Jeremy Loughman is a good player as well. It's probably the position on the field they have the most depth in as they currently stand. But for me, for a big European game, James Cronin will be number 2. And in the case of injury, you wouldn't be too panicked about having to land James Cronin into an international game. So I think at 30 years of age for a prop, it's kind of a curious one to see released, really.
Yeah. What's your reading on it, Donal?
I think it's an awful decision. I think the optics of it are poor. This is a homegrown fella. He's only 30 years of age. As Wes is alluding, the best 3 or 4 years are ahead of him. He's had a fantastic season. He's never started more games for Munster. He is, like Dave Kilcoyne is neck and neck with Cian Healy for that Ireland loosehead jersey at the moment. And James Cronin isn't that far behind him. To the extent, Kilcoyne missed a huge amount of rugby at the start of the year. If you remember, he injured his ankle in the very first game against Leinster in a game from the previous season in September. And James Cronin came in and he was outstanding. It does come down to money, but I think this is a decision that they got wrong. Josh Wycherley is a fantastic young player. We saw the job he did if you go back to the game against Claremont. But he had a fairly rough introduction, if you remember, against Slimani. Came back well, but we haven't seen him since. I don't know whether he's into the story with it, but basically he's played very few minutes. You've Liam O'Connor is another good young loosehead with a knee injury. He's come back. And Loughman, as we've seen, I remember Loughman getting a man of the match against Ospreys in a Heineken Cup game about 2 years ago. So there is depth there. There's no question in my mind that James Cronin is a tight number 2 behind Killer. So therefore, there is no way you should be leaving a player of that stature go. I mean, make the budgetary cuts somewhere else. If you have to lose player 44 in order to keep him, well, that's what you do. Because if you're in a quarter-final or a semi-final in Europe, or say a Rainbow Cup against a big South African team, and Killer gets injured, when you see James Cronin coming in off the bench, you're not worried. And the players around you aren't worried. Young Wycherley is still at a stage in his development where you'd be scratching your head, oh, geez, he could be caught badly here. So therefore, having Cronin around, especially if Kilcoyne is off with Ireland in November internationals and he misses a lot of games, then he is an integral part of the squad. I think it sends the wrong message. Pretty light of another South African second row back row coming into the squad. How much is he costing? So in that context, I think it's a very poor decision.
You're nodding away there, Birch.
Yeah, it's madness because what Munster are lacking is, I think they're okay on the loosehead side with Cronin and Kilcoyne in terms of having 2 players who can compete with, their counterparts at the top end of European rugby. Hooker-wise, they're losing Marshall. I think they need a hooker. And, tight head wise, I think, okay, I think they need a tight head, but they're actually losing. They've strengthened, obviously, the second row with Jenkins and Snyman, but you need to find the money. You need to find, and I agree with Donal. I'd rather have 2 or 3 players less between number 45 and 50 and have to go to the AIL to get a player if I'm stuck to play a Pro 14 match or Pro 16 match next year, but have the artillery on the bench or on the starting team to be able to win a knockout stage match in Europe with James Cronin. Like, they're not going to be able to replace James Cronin with an Irish qualified or non-Irish qualified equivalent. I reckon it's just down to mismanagement of their budget, spending too much in certain areas, and it's going to cost them. It'll cost them next year at some stage, and that's not against the youngsters. I'm all for the youngsters coming through, but particularly we need to understand in the front row we need to give them extra time. So Wycherley, Liam O'Connor, like Cronin's 30, he has that experience in the bank. He's been there, done that, and I can only imagine it has to be for financial reasons. And I think it's one of the ones that, if you're watching where you spend your money properly, it's a mistake. It's money I would be willing to spend to have that second top end loose head there.
Yeah, and you'd imagine he won't be short of offers as well, particularly at the age that he is. Just quickly on the Heineken Cup final, whereas La Rochelle against Toulouse, there'll be some notch on Ronald O'Gara's CV if he was to get the job done this weekend. Do you think they will? I mean, how do you view the match? Tough one to kind of analyse, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they've every chance. Their league form is as good. Their European form has been good. They seem to have huge momentum behind them. You look at the matchups in the team. I probably wouldn't have thought this before the Leinster game, but I think La Rochelle are well able for him in terms of the front five, in terms of just power up there. Arguably a more informed back row as well. Do Toulouse possibly have a few more X-factor players in the back line? Yeah, they probably do. I know Bottia and Rule and these guys have come in for huge praise, but it could be guys like obviously DuPont and Intermac are the ones that spring to mind that are the winners of a tight game. So, and I suppose that tradition that Toulouse have in the tournament counts for something as well. So it's very hard to call, I think, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised whichever way it went.
Yeah, it'd be great to see Rog do it though, wouldn't it, Donal?
It'd be fantastic. Look, he's done a brilliant job there, and it's a huge game in terms of. I think Toulouse. From the day I saw Munster Toulouse in the quarterfinal, I didn't think Toulouse are at that level. Really, I felt that whoever comes out of Leinster and La Rochelle would be my favourites going into the final, despite the fact that La Rochelle haven't been there before. Now, that said, psychologically, I think Toulouse have beaten La Rochelle 5 times in their last 6 outings, so they know what they have to offer. I think a key element for me is midfield. Toulouse have had huge injuries in midfield. They've ended up playing Zach Holmes, who's a 10, at 13 at the quarterfinal and semi-final stages, and he's been a poor defender in that channel. I'm not quite sure. I saw Thomas Ramos was back in one of their squads. I'm not quite sure if they'll be able to pick somebody else in midfield. But I keep going back to, in fact, I text Raj this last week. I don't know if he appreciated it or not. But I said, look, if Munster can score 33 points against Toulouse, then I'd fancy them to win it. And that was the one I thought defensively against Munster. They were poor. Damian Delanda had probably his best game in a red shirt since he arrived. So I think a lot could come down to that selection. In terms of up front, I'd say there's little or nothing between them. DuPont and Colby, for me, they're the reasons you're tuning into the match. They're just so fantastic to watch. I'd love to see La Rochelle win it for the obvious reasons. But if they don't, I wouldn't begrudge Toulouse winning that 5th star. Toulouse, for me, going back to the very start of the Heineken Cup, going over there in the days when they were putting 50 points on Munster, they just had this little bit of magic, a bit of that gold dust feel about them, everything. I mean, I never ever came across a rugby club that had a Michelin star restaurant. I mean, that kind of set them apart from everyone else. So if they do win it, I wouldn't be grudging it.
Absolutely. I imagine Rog will have to have a plan for Colby and DuPont as well. Birch, ironically, the 2 best players that are going to take to the pitch, well, certainly 2 of the best players in Europe at the moment, are also the smallest. But it'll be fascinating to see how they deal with the threat that Toulouse have. Yeah,
I think if Leinster were going to this final, we'd be probably, pretty optimistic that they could have Toulouse's number. So I think La Rochelle are, they certainly have a fighting chance. They have some unbelievably good individuals who can take the game on in different ways than obviously DuPont or Ches and Colby. But and they know them well. I mean, You know, some of the La Rochelle players play with DuPont at international level. They play against them twice a year in the top 14. I think La Rochelle, there's a bit of momentum there behind them. As Donal mentioned, Toulouse have had a couple of injuries. They lost last weekend to Bayonne. I know they rested a few players, but I think La Rochelle could go and win first time up. Just seem to have that, that momentum and that they're on a bit of a journey at the moment.
Yeah. Just finally then, Donal, I just want to pay tribute. I thought it was interesting this week. We spoke about the Australian rugby model going free to our television and the increase in numbers and all that it has produced, right, in playing numbers and in attendances and on television. But there are no doubt about the job they're going to have to do standards-wise when the New Zealand club sides smashed them 5-0 over the weekend in the Super Rugby campaign. But I just wanted to mark the retirement of Kieran Reid because he, I think, will go down probably as one of the best number 8s of the professional era. Donal, a little bit understated, which sounds a bit weird as a New Zealand captain, but certainly himself, Sergio Parise, have kind of led the way, and he has just been a remarkable player over the last 10-15 years.
Outstanding performer. Again, one of those players that you really admire and watch from the stand. I suppose, look, it's very difficult when you follow Richie McCaw as captain of the All Blacks. You're automatically on a loser. I mean, how do you better what he had done? Captain New Zealand to 2 World Cups in a row. In fact, was captain when they lost to France in that the famous quarterfinal in 07. But Reid, I mean, that back row that New Zealand had, McCaw, Jerome Kaino and Reid, like in terms of balance, power, athletic ability, I thought they were the perfect trio. And Reid was an integral part of that. I thought he brought a new athleticism to that position. How many times did you see him sort of in the 5-meter channels for New Zealand? Always his ability to link with people. You know, he wasn't your sort of dour, gruff type of New Zealand forward either. You know, he was understated in many ways, but he was one of those players who invariably, he never dropped below an 8 out of 10 in his performances. His try scoring record was huge, and just an impressive individual. I remember I just happened to be walking after the third test in New Zealand, which ended in a draw, and obviously he was captain to, you know, you captain the All Blacks at home in a series against the Lions. You're expected to win, and I just happened to be walking in the tunnel in Eden Park about 45 minutes, 50 minutes maybe after the game. Steve Hansen and Kieran Reid were walking together, going to the press conference. I just happened to be standing parallel with them, and I know Steve Hansen from his time in Wales, and he kind of nodded and I nodded, and you know, he just made the comment about kissing your sister when you know when you draw a series with the Lions. But you could see Reid was absolutely devastated. But yet the way he carried it himself, immediately went into the press conference 5 miners later. So look, I think he's a genuine good guy, an absolutely outstanding player, and you know, he'll go down as one of the all-time greats.
Absolutely, yeah. That's Kieran Reid, not Kieran Reid, Wes, as I managed to call him several times in commentary.
Yeah, I've noticed that over the years.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. If I gave you a choice, just the final word to you, gave you a choice between Kieran Reid at the height of his powers or Sergio Parise for your team, who would you sign?
And probably at his very best when he won the Player of the Year awards, Reid. I think he's up there with. There's a big debate about between him, Zinzan Brook, and Wayne Shelford as the best All Blacks 8. I'd probably have him ahead of Brook and below Shelford if I was picking.
Really? Okay, for those shovel hands then. Right. Lads, pleasure as always. Enjoy the Heineken Cup Final this weekend. We'll do it all again next week. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.